Okay, so close up of the basement main floor stairwell, north wall, west end, marker 23. Um, and whenever I'm also going to pull that image up for you guys to see as we go through. So you guys get an idea of it. Let's see, close up, basement main floor stairwell, north wall, west end. I don't know if that's anything significant. Let's see. Basement, main wall, stairwell, west wall, suspected blood marker 27, stain marker 27. Um, prior to getting on stream, that way I can do a more thorough outlook on it. So let me just move down real quick to the body markers there. You also have your stair rails between floor 1 and 2, markers A, B, C, close-ups, lots of swabs, and we'll go over those. I'll try to put some pictures with it. If you guys get on the website, truecrimephd.com, I will, just as soon as I get the, chance, I will upload the pictures with the exhibit connected to it so it gives you a clear understanding. I really want to get into the aspects of the bodies themselves. Okay, so here we go. So Ethan Chapin's upper body, as received by the medical examiner, Ethan Chapin's upper body cleaned, his chest and throat injuries. That could be a different chest injury, I'm not sure, or they could be referring to the subdural or the subclavian vein injury, which would be, I'm pretty sure that's what they're referring to because they're including everything in these. Here's something new that we were not, and I'm going to pull up the image here, autopsy, to give you all a little understanding. Ethan Chapin's scalp wound on his right side. So we learned he had a scalp wound. He also had a scalp wound on the left center side, a wound, and I'm assuming from wound they're meaning a cut, not a cut necessarily, but more like a laceration or a stab. They say, see, scalp wound on the right side, scalp wound on the left center side, then the wound near his left ear, wounds on the back of his left thigh, side view of wounds to the back of his left thigh, close up of wounds to his left thigh, and then close up of wounds to the inside of his thigh, a side view of wounds to his right leg, close up of wounds to his right leg, wounds to the top of his right hand, his fingers, and that's where everybody was kind of like, doesn't that sound more like defensive wounds? It very well could. It very well could be defensive wounds, but they have not determined based on the overall trajectory of the evidence and so forth that it is, they have not determined that it was defensive wounds. And that could be for many, many different reasons. Okay, so let's look at the whole overall trajectory here. So the medical examiner reported originally, they cited by investigators, they noted that Ethan had only had sharp force injuries. In other words, Chapin's autopsy showed only incised wounds from a very sharp blade. There were no blunt force trauma or other marks. So that is something that really got me. But I've said from the very beginning that I personally feel as though that it would, he had defensive wounds, considering the nature of the, the case itself. But, you know, crucially, there were no defense injuries on Chapin's arms. Hands or arms were reported originally, but now that we have these new unsealed documents, we're seeing that there were injuries to his hands, there were injuries to his fingers. Um, so, I make no mention of cuts or bruises on his palms, fingers, or forearms. In fact, Latah County Coroner, if you guys remember, Kathy Mabott, stated only that at least one victim had defensive wounds. So it's got everybody reeling like these clearly look as if they are defensive wounds. Um, and I don't see how he couldn't have defensive wounds because, I mean, clearly it takes some time to fully bleed out when you have the injuries that he has. He's still going to have, become alert, you know, and I've said that from the very beginning, and I still feel that way. I mean, that's not what they state, but based on, I'm just going to tell you guys based on what I have learned that any other time why they wouldn't consider it defensive wounds. Now, forensic pathologist standards explain why Chapin's injuries wouldn't be labeled as defensive. So, since he apparently did not visibly struggle, any minor wounds on his hands or fingers, if present, were likely incidental and did not match the typical defensive pattern. So, pathologists require that defensive wounds uh, show evidence of active effort, per se, to block or grab the weapon, which I think is, I mean, clearly, I mean, that's just my opinion. I think that it was clearly defensive wounds, but I'm just telling you from their standpoint where they got that it wasn't defensive wounds based on their standards. Um, and I know everybody else is feeling the same way. They are just, I've had so many emails on that. So based on their standards, this is where, you know, when they're, since he had no apparent um, visible struggle, which we have seen that there's a lot of different aspects of this case that just have not, as it's been unsealed, we were just like, what? I thought you said that you know, they were all in bed and they were all asleep and so there's a lot of things about this case that's absolutely, um, I think, it's kind of in their attempt to keep things sealed. It's made it more complex, and a lot of inaccuracies were portrayed and put out there. So it's made it even more as if the media and individuals can't really trust the process, and a lot of times you can't. So that's why we do what we do. Um, so that's kind of where that is. So there's no apparent struggle in their determination. So in his case, his injuries were limited to single stab wounds to the upper body. We thought, not the multiple cuts on the hands, arms expected from fending off a blade. But clearly here, and someone else asked me, what are your typical defense wounds? Well, your typical defense wounds, from what I'm aware of, I'm no expert, but it's generally going to be like your fingers, your forearms, and your hands, things like that. Um, Experts note that defensive wounds assume the victim is conscious and they are fighting back. As one forensic review emphasizes, finding defense injuries indicates the homicidal manner of death and that the victim resisted, but their absence does not exclude homicide. Specifically, a victim um, in this circumstance, I mean, he's clearly had time to be alert and aware. So I don't know. And the more that we learn, the more things that we're adding, and you can see in the images, and I'm going to post the autopsy